This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can find all the cards featured in this video in their store if you follow the links in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. At least that's normally what I do in these videos. From time to time, I like to do things a little bit different, and instead look at the worst cards in the game instead of the best ones, and that's what we're going to be doing today. In particular, I want to give my picks for the worst Dimir cards ever printed. These are the cards that you should never be sleeving up at all. Ever. To be eligible for this list, a card had to have a Dimir color identity. That means that the blue and black mana symbols had to appear somewhere on the card, with no other colored mana symbols appearing. This means that cards that cost both blue and black mana are of course eligible, but it also means that black cards with activated abilities that cost blue mana are, and so forth. In all, there are 295 cards with a Dimir color identity in this game, and in this video, we'll talk about the 10 worst ones. While this video is based on my own opinion, I do use a little bit of data to help me make my picks. In particular, no card can end up on a worst list if it has ever top-8'd a premier event or if it's played a significant amount in EDH. Generally, the cards in this list are also unplayable and limited. Alright, let's get to the list. At number 10, I have Essence Vortex. Most cards that give your opponent a choice aren't particularly good, and this is because, for much of the game, there will be a choice for them to make that just doesn't hurt them very much, and if that's the case, choice cards like Essence Vortex will rarely be worth a whole card. Most of the time when you play this, your opponent will just pay the life without batting an eye, which makes this a super situational burn spell of sorts. Sure, sometimes your opponent's life will be low enough that they have to let the creature die, but that won't happen often enough to ever be putting this in your deck. At number 9, I have Malicious Advice. So, tapping stuff down can be pretty nice in some situations, and Malicious Advice is capable of tapping down 3 pretty important permanent types at instant speed. The problem is, it's very inefficient at doing it. At 3 mana, it is tapping down a single thing, and that is rarely going to be something worth doing. What's more is, in addition to being very inefficient, Malicious Advice also makes you pay life equal to X. If it didn't make you pay life, Malicious Advice would still not be very good, but it wouldn't be one of the worst Dimir cards ever. I know some people tend to look at cards and think of their ideal scenario, like with this one, using it to tap down all of your opponent's lands or something sounds pretty sweet. But the cost in mana and life drastically reduces your chances of ever actually being able to do that. When evaluating a card, you have to think of what it will do on a regular basis, and Malicious Advice normally won't be doing something that makes it worth paying mana, life, and a card. There are dozens of better ways to tap down your opponent's stuff. If someone told you to play with this in your deck, they, well, gave you some malicious advice. At number 8, it is Grime blotter. So, unlike most multicolored cards, Grime blotter is actually easier to cast because it costs hybrid mana. But even with that in the pro column, Grime blotter has way too many cons to ever be worth playing. First, it's terrible on the vanilla test as a 4-mana 2/2. To overcome that abysmal of a stat line, you've got to actually do something, and Grime blotter doesn't exactly deliver there. It has the innovative but mediocre untapped mechanic, which means that unlike most activated abilities, you untap the Grime blotter as part of the cost instead of tapping it. That sounds cool, but it also means it has to be tapped to use the ability, and that means you had to attack with your really bad 4-mana 2/2. And sure, you can attack with it and immediately use that ability before combat happens or after blockers are declared, but the ability is pretty mediocre to begin with. So only being able to get it going by attacking is pretty terrible. And yes, I know you can tap down your Grime blotter using other means to activate the ability, but the payoff here is not worth the effort. At number 7, it is Tattered Drake. A 5-mana 2/2 with flying is terrible. I mean, you generally expect a card like that to cost 3 mana, and adding the ability to regenerate doesn't do enough to overcome those shortcomings. It does mean that if you leave mana up, it can block indefinitely, but by the time you play it, it's probably already really outclassed in the sky, so it won't usually be able to attack. This will usually just be a really expensive wall with flying and regenerate. No thanks. At number 6, I have Benthic Djinn. A 4-mana 5/3 with Island Walk isn't all that bad on the vanilla test, especially with what we've seen so far, but costing 2 different colors of mana does make it a kind of underwhelming stat line. The problem the Djinn has is the significant downside it comes with, making you lose 2 life during your upkeep every turn. There are plenty of cards that make you lose life that are well worth the life loss, but this is not one of them. He does deserve a little bit of credit for hitting so hard against blue decks, but even then he dies to a whole lot, and if you aren't up against someone with islands, the Djinn is terrible. At number 5, I have Vectis Silencers. We've seen several creatures fail the vanilla test so far, and here's another one. Most 3-mana 1/2s will best be used as coasters. And sure, there's some more stuff going on here, but it isn't enough to keep this from being terrible. I like creatures who can gain Death Touch, especially in Limited, because they can be relevant all game long, but most of them have better stats and gain Death Touch for much less mana. You have to pay 6 total mana for this to trade with something, and most of the time it just won't be worth it. This is an artifact creature, and that matters a little bit. It generally is more upside than downside thanks to all the artifact synergies in this game, but it isn't enough to keep it from appearing on the top half of this list. At number 4, I have Slinking Serpent, who makes Benthic Djinn look amazing. A 4-mana 2/3 with Forest Walk is what you get here, and of course you have to pay 2 colors of mana to make it happen. Even if you're playing against someone who has a forest in play, this is woefully inefficient. Imagine a 4-mana 2/3 that's unblockable, and you're still not talking about a very good card, and that's way better than this. So even in its best case scenario, when you're playing against a green deck that has a forest in play, it's still not very good, and that's what allows it to be on this list. At number 3, I have Shore Snapper. A Grey Ogre, in other words a 3-mana 2/2, needs to do something pretty good to overcome its stat line, and Shore Snapper doesn't. It can gain Island Walk if you pay a blue mana, which you know means it's unblockable sometimes, but having to pay additional mana for that is kind of silly when there are plenty of way more efficient landwalk creatures around. It's also kind of funny how many bad landwalk cards are on this list. Who knew that Dimir had a landwalk sub-theme? At number 2, I have 2 cards, both of which are Legends from Legends. Cards from that set have appeared on all of these lists, and that's because there are some real bad multicolored cards in that set. It was the first set to feature both Legends and multicolored cards, and for some reason, they seem to have felt that both of those things were upsides, even though in reality, they're downsides. It was even worse at the time because all Legends were restricted to 1 copy per deck. Savitri Scarzum is a vanilla 7-mana 6/4, and Urdrago is a 7-mana 4/4 with First Strike, who also turns off Swamp Walk, and there's that weird Landwalk sub-theme again. And at number 1, I have Sealed Fate. I'm not a huge fan of effects that exile your opponent's stuff from their library without impacting the board at all, but I know they are a necessary evil as sideboard tech against combo decks. Sealed Fate is way worse than most cards like that, because you have to pay a ton of mana to really look at a significant amount of your opponent's cards, and it's a sorcery, so you'll find yourself tapping out to do this without doing anything at all to add to the board, and that's always dangerous. You get to get rid of 1 card from among those you look at, and then put the others back in any order. I do think that last part is kind of cool in terms of design. It's fun to imagine putting all of your opponent's lands on top or bottom of the pile, but you just have to spend so much mana to actually do something with this that it's not remotely good. And sure, if you get infinite mana, planning out your opponent's whole game could be kind of funny, but you know what? You should just win the game if you have that much mana around. Well, those are my picks for the worst Dimir cards in all of Magic. If you want to own any of these terrible cards to show them to your friends, you can find a link to Card Kingdom's store for each of these cards in the description. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to make sure you're caught up on all the MTG Top 10s I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.